Go ahead and get started, everybody. Welcome to the September installment of the Accelerant Research Virtual Insights Conference. Well, to those who have joined us in prior months, welcome back. To those who are joining for the first time, welcome and thanks. Quick history of these conferences and what they're all about. First, my name is Bill McDowell. I'm COO at Accelerant Research. We're going to be your MCs for today's festivities. Just, a quick rundown of format, intros, and all that fun stuff. And then I'm going to get out of the way and let our speakers do their thing, which is what everybody's here for. But first, so history of the Accelerant Virtual Insights Conference. It's actually all born out of shutdown last year. You may remember when this COVID thing got started, all the conferences were being canceled and not a lot of networking opportunities to be had. So we just collectively at Accelerant started reaching out to friends in the industry and kind of scraped together what was the first of, at the time, branded as the Quarantine Virtual Insights Conference. We've since dropped the quarantine because that's depressing and nobody wants to keep going with that. So we're just going with Accelerant Virtual Insights Conference. I'm noticing that some of our favorite conferences are now starting to get back to in person, which is great, encouraging, wonderful. But reality is that a lot of us are still remote, still not hitting the road. So we're going to keep rolling with these virtual conferences as an opportunity just to get together, network, talk a little insights shop, listen to some speakers who are experts in the field, talk about what they do on a daily basis. So we got a couple of ground rules that we operate by. These are pretty easy peasy, so no pressure. Number one is, we're at the mercy of tech, right? We've still got folks that are dispersed and in some cases logging in from home. And there are, I guess, not just tech and bandwidth issues potentially, but you got dogs barking, deliveries being made, you name it. It gets into point number two, but that's just the be respectful aspect, right? We're all in this together. Give everybody a break in terms of what's going on. Thankfully we've had some good luck when it comes to tech and connectivity. We're using Zoom webinar. We've got some folks that are accessing directly in the webinar itself. Others are coming in via YouTube. Obviously, we're not all in the same, presentation hall together. So we've got to do our best to try to simulate the networking aspect of conferences and get-togethers. The way we can do that is if you're in Zoom, engage in the Q&A and the chat function, pose questions to the speakers, talk amongst yourselves. We've also got, we're live streaming it on YouTube as well, so there's a chat over there. Also Twitter, LinkedIn, just use the hashtag ARVIC, and we'll just try to monitor as much of the chatter as we can. Any questions that you have for the speakers, we'll monitor those, keep track of them, do Q&A sessions, either during presentations or directly after. So what we've got today is a really good lineup of speakers. Let's get first to our noon speaker. That's going to be Cliff Kim from Fender, followed by Dr. Carissa Cliff from Fruit of the Loom. Batting cleanup today is going to be Jamie Sherman from Netflix. And our first speaker of the day is going to be Ligja Gill from Turner Sports, talking about the guts and glory of UX research in sports media. Very excited about it. I think that's enough of my intro spiel, so I'm going to get out of the way. I'll come back and lead some Q&A whenever we're ready, but I'm going to disappear and let Ligja do her thing.
Thanks, Bill. That was quite the intro. I am happy to be lead-off batter for for this installment of the Virtual Insights Conference here. And are you guys? Wait a second. I just want to make sure that I am sharing the correct screen. Let's give this a try. Are you all seeing the cover of the presentation?
Yes, we are. The
Right
voice
on,
from
right
above.
on. Okay, great. I'll also have the chat pane just off to the side here, in case anyone has any questions or comments as I'm going through. But again, I just want to start off by thanking Bill McDowell and Accelerant Research for these virtual insights conferences. I've had the opportunity to to take part and watch many of the past presentations, and they really did fill that hole that we had over the past year, where our networking opportunities have had to evolve. So really excited to be able to take part of this and hopefully share a little bit of my perspective from my own little corner of the industry, which is sports media here. So as you can tell, I'm going to be sprinkling in some sports metaphors throughout this. Yes, I am trying to be cute, but it's also, I am trying to keep the conversation and the session as light and accessible as possible. So really, my whole goal here is to provide insight into what it's like to apply UX research to sports fans' experiences and provide an industry perspective on why UXR opportunities are so few and far between in sports media and, sort of by extension, the broader media and entertainment industry. And then, just thinking about how this all, this presentation, how it all came to be, it really came from, well, number one, actually, I was actually inspired by a previous presentation by one of my former colleagues, Jason Jacobson, a couple of months ago for Accelerant Research. He shared a perspective piece on comparing what it's like to work on the supplier side versus, on the vendor side, and, really just comparing and contrasting how the research that we do, how the tenor changes depending on what side of the fence that you work on. So, thinking about that as inspiration, one of the questions that I get approached with a lot is, in addition to what's it like to work in sports media and how can I get into this? It's really, how, for the rare opportunities that come up in this space, how do I shoot my shot? So for today's conversation, that's a little bit of what I will be covering here. And I want to point out here, this picture that I dropped in is actually me prior to my current position. This was before I joined Warner Media and Turner Sports in 2017. As you can see, even back then, I already had aspirations to move into this space. So, hopefully providing a little bit of, my own experiences in, essentially carving a path to what I consider myself a dream job might hopefully inspire others to think about what they can do to create their own way, to help create their own ways. So again, just a little bit more about me. Today, I am going to be talking and reflecting on my current experience as senior manager of UX research within Turner Sports, Warner Media. But I also want to call out here that prior to this time, my entire UX research background has really been on the consulting and agency side. And I thought that was a really good, really great training ground because it provided me a lot of exposure to clients across many different industries, which gives you a lot of ways that you might be able to apply your skills as a UX research to help solve different types of business problems. So, you can imagine that the work that we did with Google and Facebook, things like that might feel a little bit different than what we try to help MasterCard and Wells Fargo with. That's different than what we would help with the big pharma like Merck and Genentech. But all that is to say, when you have this wide range of exposure, you begin to appreciate how each of these industries are different and what are all the nuances within them that make research or a UX researcher more effective in that space. I also could just call out that I feel like it's important for research practitioners to stay involved and network in the broader community. So I try to attend various webinars and meetup groups. Was once much more heavily involved with the NYC User Experience Professionals Association, even actually serving 2 terms as president way back in the day. So now, all that said, I am going to be focusing on my time at Warner Media. And this is where I'll pause and give the obligatory disclaimer here that the views that I'm going to be sharing in today's conversation are purely my own and not intended to represent Warner Media or Turner Sports in any way. I'm not sharing anything that is particularly sensitive or proprietary, but all that is to say, I do want to make sure that is clear and put out there. Now, for just to help provide a little bit of context, Warner Media, some people may be familiar with it, others might not be, and for those who aren't, necessarily familiar with the Warner Media overarching brand, you probably know it without even realizing. You've probably consumed content from HBO, Warner Brothers, CNN, HBO Max being our big one now, without realizing that this is all sort of falling within the Warner Media umbrella. So big, media conglomerate, not just sports, also includes entertainment, news, and so forth. And for those who have been following the news, AT&T officially acquired us in 2019. I believe that deal was closed. And then just this past year, there was a decision made to spin off Warner Media from AT&T, who had just acquired us not too long ago, so that we can spin off and join together with Discovery. So that deal has just closed, and no, we do not know any of the details of what this means for us in our business. But as you take a look at this sort of updated list of what all these brands encompass, you'll probably recognize most of these brands as sort of cable channels, right? But Turner Sports is a little bit of a different animal, and that's where I'm specifically aligned to our Turner Sports properties. So with Turner Sports, it's not necessarily a channel the same way that, for example, HBO or TNT, True TV, CNN, that those are. It's Turner Sports is really, you think of it more as a B2B arrangement where we are in partnership with leagues to have the rights to distribute their live games and official content on our platforms. So, some of these involve the NBA, the NCAA, Major League Baseball. We actually just newly acquired the NHL and will be kicking off NHL on TNT, not too long, in just a few weeks. But these are, these are the, this is my domain. This is the areas that I focus on. Now, I think when you think of Turner Sports, probably the first thing that you guys associate it with most closely are these fellas. This is the Inside the NBA. You might recognize this is the Inside the NBA studio crew. They anchor the studio show for the NBA on TNT, and boy, do these guys bring a lot of fun and shenanigans to the sport. But where I tend to focus on as a UX researcher is really more in the development and helping the digital products. So for example, spent a good deal of time working, conducting research for the NBA site and app. It's your standard official league app that provides information, stats, highlights, news, as well as it's the home of their NBA League Pass, which is their subscription service that allows fans to be able to stream out of market games. So this is, NBA League Pass is essentially for that NBA super fan who wants to take in as many games as possible. Another area of focus of mine has been supporting the NCAA.com, and more specifically, their March Madness Live experience. This is March Madness Live is built very specifically for the men's college basketball tournament. So literally that one tournament, 4 weeks of time, of relevancy throughout the year. But all this attention and development goes to this because, this ultimately is a huge business priority, a huge revenue generator for Warner Media. So, with March Madness Live, what we're doing here is, in addition to being that sort of league official source for information, stats, and what have you, this also enables people to stream all tournament games live for free, up until a point where they have to authenticate, and do things like complete bracket challenge games during the tournament. So very, similar experience to the NBA, a lot of overlapping features and content, but a completely different context and a completely different experience. And finally, the wild card of the Turner Sports brands that that I shared earlier is Bleacher Report. Bleacher Report itself is not, is not a league, but is quite literally a digital property that we acquired because it, because it has played such an important role in bringing in fans, getting eyeballs in, in our experience. This is an app or site, if you're not familiar, that is focused on sports and adjacent cultural interests like gaming, BR kicks, for the sneakerheads who collect. And this focuses on multiple sports, though there is a much larger concentration of NBA and NFL fans compared to the other sports that they provide coverage for. So just to start getting into a little bit more about what it is actually like to apply UXR in sports media. One of the things that I want to call out here is that we've started to really, blur the lines between a user experience and an overall fan's experience, where user experience traditionally has been more about, interfacing with digital products across platforms and what have you. um, fan experience is our attempt at sort of widening that scope a little bit to gain a more holistic view of the fan, which includes those pieces of what we would call traditional user experience, discovery, but layers in market and consumer insights as well, so that we do get a much more holistic view of the fan. So our fan experience research, as we're calling it now, our mission is to develop the best understanding of sports fans and use data-driven insights to deliver exceptional and innovative fan experiences. And what that means for us, how we find purpose in filling this mission, is by advocating for our sports fans, by instilling confidence to our teams that we are building the right things, we're building the right experiences, and putting together the right content. And then ultimately also improving efficiency, not just for our end user, our fans, but as a team who are serving the fans, improving our efficiencies for us. So as we think about how we introduced these practices into Turner Sports, actually, one thing I should mention just for additional context here is that when I started, when I was brought on in 2017 to Turner Sports, I was apparently in the entire Warner Media organization at the time, the only user experience researcher in-house. Now, research as an organization was very sophisticated in, sort of Turner, Warner Media land. But as a subdiscipline within research, UX research was a little bit newer and unknown. A lot of the research that had that traditional media is really used to is, a lot more geared towards ratings and measurement and ad effectiveness. So, ultimately, research that helps to prove out and maybe spur, add more to our bottom line through our partnerships with our advertisers. User experience was a little bit different in that our stakeholders are, within our own company, so it is much more internal. And it's still, it would, bring it on. It was difficult to, it was slow to help to get others to understand what value user experience offers, what is the purpose of it, and where it complements other forms of insights. So when we're thinking about all of this together, integrating into processes, or like content development processes, product development processes that did not have proper UX research representation before, it takes time. And as we think about sort of the development life cycle, our mission, at least in the early days, was to try to help them recognize the role of insights and where it can fit in throughout the product development process, and all with the fan at the center. So in addition to our user experience, sort of our standard user experience type of questions, a lot of the questions that we are focused on, more broadly from a fan experience standpoint, we're really trying to, we've done this exercise to sort of map out and categorize what are all the areas that we touch. And in that sense, it's almost evolving into a map of what are all the, what are all the variables and factors that affect what, from a business standpoint, everything ladders up to, which is audience impact. How do we grow our audience? How do we keep them consuming more? How do we keep them engaged. And then as we peel back the layers of the onion, we recognize that there, we can understand that more if we first take a look at what our fans are doing. What are their behaviors, from an online and media consumption standpoint? And then, as you can see, from this, from this area here, we start to differentiate that even more, to first segregate out our sports and our non-sports related content, non-sports being, every other form of entertainment, news, shows, movies, etc. And then within the sports content themselves, breaking it down between the multiple layers, of different types of sports content, whether that's game content, literally the live games, to the non-game content, which is everything outside of the live games. You might think of our documentaries, interviews, features, our Inside the NBA studio show. And then beyond the online and media consumption, there's all these, ancillary fan activities that, that are part of their behavior, things like fantasy, video games like NBA 2K is huge among our, NBA fans. Betting, even like, again, for the sneakerheads, their interest in those types of gear and shoes, and ultimately connecting with the community. Now, aside from what we're trying to, understanding what they're doing, it's also really good to get a pulse on where our fans' heads are at. And this is where, we have these ever-present questions around, their attitudes and sentiments towards, particular leagues, brands, events that are going on. Understanding that underlying motivation of why fans are engaging the way that they are, trying to get a sense of where sports is prioritized in the grand scheme of their own lives. What chunk of the pie does sports take up, and where does it sit in a hierarchy? And then all that also wraps back to just their state of awareness, which does relate back to a lot of the behaviors that we pointed out. How aware are they that these are options that they can engage in, what have you? So taking that even further, we're also taking a look at, we should also take some consideration for the environment and the landscape, really those external factors that impact fandom. We've certainly had a lot of that over the last year and a half, but I'm talking about things like technology, for example, been a huge topic for a long time, the cord cutting behaviors where consumers are trading in their traditional cable subscriptions in turn for other forms of media. In particular, the streaming services that seem to have blown up like gangbusters over the past years, and especially in the advent of the pandemic, where everyone was encouraged to stay home and stay put. Now, speaking of the pandemic, that is another example of things that impact fandom. Current events, so for example, what did the engagement look like in sports when sports was canceled completely? And in regards to everything that happened in 2020, seeing the social justice movement last year, really amplified by the voices of passionate NBA players who are using their platform to shine lights on these issues and taking very bold stances, like walking out on games. These are tremendous things that aren't even necessarily sports related. But then at the just real quickly on some of the other ones, everyone does have their own socioeconomic composition and status. That all factors into what they do, how they think, what have you. And then obviously the time of year, specifically to sports. What it means when we say seasonality is what sports are relevant for this particular time of year. So we talked about, the layers and the nuances of what we're trying to learn, but then we also recognize here that there's a lot of game and sports related variables that impact their behaviors and mindset. And I'm talking, things like, let's say, just to start off with, how big of a fan they are of that team or sport, really that level of avidity. Your behavior might be different. Your mindset might be different when you think about, is this, are they playing tonight, or, are they not playing for another few days? These are things that we have to consider, right? You would even have to also consider the concurrence of games with other events, other games and leagues in the league, other sports that are going on right now, and their lives and everything outside of sports. Event matchups, even just, how exciting would it be to get two, to have two marquee teams playing compared to, let's say, the ones that are going to be riding the NBA draft lottery. Sometimes it's not a particularly exciting must-see matchup. You also get difficulty of schedule as, again, just another point to consider if this is something that a fan is really going to, if this is something that is going to impact a fan's experience. Team performance, and all the way down to individual player performance and availability. It's, as you can see, there's a lot of, little layers here to consider, and all of these variables are extremely difficult to control. So this is when I'll talk a little bit about, taking all that nuance and complexity to consider, when thinking about doing research with sports plans, and talking about how it applies to the fielding and planning and the execution of the research. This is where, when I talk about, when I use the title, the guts and glory of UX research, which I was being a little bit facetious and dramatic, but, I think just going back to the guts piece of this is really where what I'm talking about as far as, sort of those really unique and interesting challenges to get around. So for example, timing our fielding according to game schedules or leagues. You have to be, it requires careful planning and coordination. So it's important to be precise and organized as you're trying to field and launch research with specific time boxes in mind. It also makes us think more deeply about the specificity of the scenarios and prompts that we put in front of our participants. Because in a lot of ways, this is our way of controlling for some of those variables. A lot of the details that we'll put in, sometimes it might go over the head of some more casual fans, but a lot of times that additional level of detail that we might introduce into the scenario or a prompt really helps to make sure that we have them in the right relevant frame of mind. So saying, like, for example, in a college basketball study, we're in the second round of March Madness and there are 4 games going on at once, to really help paint that picture. Another example, you receive a notification that the Knicks and Nets game is 88-92 with 3 minutes left. So pulling in, a lot of those contextual details does help to shape that experience, just does help to shape the research experience and what we're trying to learn, what we try to get out of our participants. The same applies with regards to minimizing distractions with accurate placeholders in our prototypes or any creative materials that we're putting out in front of testing. Now, what it means is that sports fans, if we're asking them to, put themselves in this particular scenario and imagine themselves in that time, we also have to make sure that the context, that the visual stimuli all are all in agreement with what that we're consistent with the scene that we're trying to paint there. We have to make sure that there's some level of, I wouldn't say accuracy, but maybe plausibility in the different micro details that we put in. Like, let's say, for example, in the background of the site, you'll have various scores of games going on, making sure that the time left and the quarter that it's in, the score are all relatively plausible. Even even things like depicting a blowout, if that's part of the scenario that we're trying to elicit. We have to be careful about which teams we select, or when at that point in the game we should have that data point. Lots of micro details that maybe go a little bit more invisible to some of our participants, maybe not as appreciated, but in large part, our fans do pay attention to those points, and that if they see something that's inconsistent or just off with what with the scenario that they're presenting, it does tend to derail the sessions that we're and the feedback that we're trying to collect. Now, one thing on top of this is the fact that we often have to do off-season research, which presents its own challenges, right? So in the examples of Bleacher Report, when we do research for Bleacher Report, this is multiple sports. So all year round, there is some form of live active sport going on. So there's more opportunities for incremental product feature release, more opportunities for testing in more of this agile environment. NBA is somewhat similar as well. It is focused on one sport, but you've got a long runway. From October to June, 9 months out of the year, the NBA is in season. We're talking about, and this is probably a low estimate too, because I don't think we're factoring in the potential games in the playoff series, but we're talking about essentially 2,500 games over a 9-month period. So, again, there's always something that we could be doing in engaging fans, even in the off season, right? Because there's things like the NBA draft, the summer league, where there's still a bit of attention. Now, the real interesting case, and this is where I go back to, I'm going to tell some more stories, is related to March Madness, because what we're talking about is extremely compressed time to essentially get a fan experience right. There's no, there's very little room for experimentation, incremental release, because this March Madness Live site and app is really only active with fresh content for 4 weeks out of the year. Really, you only have one shot to get it right. So in thinking about what this must mean, right? 4 weeks out of the year is when there's, prime user research, fielding opportunities. What about the rest of the year? Certainly we can do some, some forms of studies, some testing where it's not as critical to have to have our participants be in that specific frame of mind. But in essence, we have to, what we've had to do is really plan carefully around our limited fielding window of, something like 20 days if we want to maximize our learnings from this limited window. That means multiple work streams, multiple markets, and engaging vendors, pulling in stringers from other teams to help go through all these data points. And you might be wondering, this seems, maybe those numbers, I've seen crazier, right? But again, going back to the point of traditional media, sports media in Warner Media's case, is just a little bit slower to adopt. We have a very small team. I start when I was brought on to establish the team in 2017. I was a team of one for about 2.5 years. We were we were a team of two for a while, and now I think we are 4 years out. We're at almost 4. So we're growing like gangbusters, obviously, but what I mean is that this is what I mean to point out here is that we are doing this research all at once, essentially with a very, very small team. So what if you want to sort of see what that looks like from a timing and a Gantt chart standpoint, you can sort of see here that we have to utilize a lot of our, a lot of the pre-tournament to get our ducks in a row so that we can field simultaneous research all at once, and use, just field, collect, and then use this protracted time after the tournament to digest and make sense of it all. So it really does become, for a logistical challenge. Another piece is just being able to pivot on a dime. Now, we had a once in a lifetime event in 2020, where essentially the entire sports world, as well as the rest of the world, was canceled, was put on hiatus. Prior to that, we had, a fairly robust plan for March Madness in place. Sort of our, like I was saying, making sure that we are carefully planning our concurrent fielding for that limited 4-week window. So had 3 streams of work, across a few markets, some including diaries and IDIs, just getting a whole slew of insights. But then, hey, guess what? Sports was canceled. In fact, sports was canceled on the day that we intended to launch one of our diary studies for fielding. So what do we do here? What do we do with our time? We still have a lot of questions. obviously our questions, especially in this rapidly evolving situation where we were in March, mid-March 2020, required us to pivot. So our new plan, turning our March Madness studies into the sports hiatus research, where we essentially take the same fans that we recruited, same overall structure, but rejiggered it to help Warner Media understand what fans are doing and consuming in the absence of live sports. Like, how are they scratching that itch? So I talk a lot about, sort of the more dramatic pieces of coordinating these research efforts, but I also want to touch on, why I've strove to work in sports, applying UX research to sports in some way. And I think for me, what it comes down to, which is something that we've seen time and time again in our research, is that sports brings people together. So really the upside here, or the glory, you could call it, is that, sports is universal. We never, even though we talk about the complexities and all the layers of a fan, finding fans for our studies is not a problem, because for a lot of these folks, they're passionate about sports, and that translates into enthusiastic study participation, quite literally lower no-show rates. We love our diary studies, and for longitudinal studies, we really want to keep attrition rates down. So, sports fans are definitely, from what I've seen compared to other industries, a little bit more motivated to stick through long longitudinal studies. And why? I mean, for them, it's fun. For them, it's fun. And as a moderator who is in there with them, it's fun for me too. It's enjoyable and productive fielding. They say things at the end of the session like, I could talk sports all day, or I could do this for free. You wouldn't have to pay me. But there is a tremendous amount of joy in conducting these types of studies. And on top of that, they're excited to be able to see and give feedback for upcoming innovations in sports. They're excited to take part in that and to contribute. And overall, again, going back to this unifying aspect of sports, there's sort of a broader mission here in making sports more inclusive and accessible to all, so that it continues to be this unifying force. So why are our roles in sports media so rare? Bill Gates said it in '96, and it's still true. All these years later, content is still king, meaning in the case of digital products and sports media, if you build it, they will come. And if anyone wants to throw in the chat what movie this is from, I will give you kudo points. But really, what is the holdup? Why does UXR get dunked on in traditional media compared to tech and other? Yes, Field of Dreams. Great points, Marcella and Calvin. Yes. So going back to this, what's the holdup, right? Why is UXR lagging compared to tech and other sectors, right? One is, again, that concept of if they build it, they will come. There's this exclusivity in where we're getting, and where the content is available. So fans will tolerate that for UX when content access is limited. If they don't really have much choice, they'll suffer, they'll suffer through some things in order to get the content that they want. I'm also talking about inertia here. This is, traditional broadcast media has been around since the 1920s, so it's got a whole century, almost a whole century on some of the other newly emerging industries where UXR is a little bit more embedded and embraced. But because the traditional broadcast media has a deep industry history with established standards and metrics, it's really hard to, almost look at things in a new way and, sort of recognize that, this new form of insight, this additional form of insight as something that is worth investing in the same way that we do research, for example, to help our advertisers be more effective. So there's still a lot of education that needs to happen. So ultimately, what we're talking about in traditional broadcast media is a low organizational UX maturity. And that, it does take time to lay down the steps and require, education and buy-in. But, and this is not my graphic, this is Evan Shapiro's from August 2020. And, even just in 1 year, this is already a little bit outdated. But as you can see in this, map of the entertainment and universe, you will see, a lot of the traditional broadcast media now sort of commingled with tech. Especially in the last years, we're joining the streaming wars. Traditional media is increasingly joining the tech world. So, so in that sense, I see the tide turning. I see that there is going to be a slow wave of more and more UX researchers being brought into the space. So looking ahead, I'm already seeing jobs after jobs popping up that are in this general, media and entertainment and gaming spaces. I mean, all of these are valuable and adjacent disciplines that that's just indicating that growth is happening. So for those who are curious and are interested in getting getting one of these rare opportunities in research in the sports media space, couple suggestions I'll offer here. I don't think that these are necessarily game what do you call it, game changers, but they are, I think it's still important, right? So keeping abreast of industry news, so not just sports, but also paying attention to the rest of that ecosystem, media, entertainment, tech, and understanding what are the developments in the space. One way that you can get a deeper understanding is to actually network with individuals who work in those industries and take some time for informational interviews to get their perspective, their understanding, their download of the industry. Another thing that you might consider is exploring other types of insight roles, if there are, that come up in the space that you want. Perhaps things like analytics or market research, consumer insights, or even ad sales research is an area of interest with cross applicability with with the research skills you may already have, but might have more entryways into the actual company. And of course, you could stay observant, observe your fellow sports fans, and call your own informal insights. Make use of sports digital products and have a perspective on them. And then stay alert, stay alive, watch the market for new leads, because the jobs are coming on. And as you can see, more and more of the more and more in the media tech intersection space is looking to bring on UX researchers. So what do you got to work on here? A few more, I guess, more tactical tips here to offer, but another another opportunity for trivia if anyone wants to drop in the QA or chat. If anybody recognizes this infographic and who is being depicted doing a perfect Euro step here, I'd be curious if anyone recognizes this fella. But so when the opportunity comes up, some of my personal suggestions are, number one, make use of that cover letter, making your case about why your experience is relevant and important and drawing parallels from your past experience. In a lot of ways, I almost look more to a cover letter than a resume with applicants, because I get to see a little bit more of that strategic thinking in how they're representing themselves and how they are offering themselves essentially as a solution to filling a role. With your work examples, I think another big thing is being able to very clearly articulate the objectives, approach, and your contributions to the work. This isn't, necessarily specific to the sports piece, but it is, something that we would be, because you aren't working you wouldn't be necessarily working in a vacuum. You would be working amongst a team of cross-functional groups to be able to articulate your perspective and what you're trying to do and how you will be doing it in a clear and accessible way is something that we would be looking for as well. Understanding your stakeholders, making sure that you understand what their goals are and offering up suggestions about how you might be able to help them. And then also making sure that you understand your teammates. What is your ultimate mission and how should we work together? I think a lot of these things are things that I would surface in an interview and a hiring process, just to demonstrate and set yourself apart from many of the others who may be trying to get into this field. So I know we're pretty much right at time, and I saw a few questions come in. Bill, should I attempt at some of these? Do we still have time to attempt these questions?
Well, so just got a note from Cliff, our next speaker, who's running a couple of minutes behind. So yeah, let's go for it. Keep it rolling.
All right, sure. Okay, so I am in the chat now. I see a question from Gregory. How do you know that the enthusiasm you're seeing from participating sports fans isn't merely reflective of the sports fans that communicate their enthusiasm to you? There are a wider number of disenchanted sports fans too. Yes. So no, absolutely. And I don't. When I say enthusiasm, I should probably temper that term more with passion, actually, because you're right. Enthusiasm does imply, positive, mostly positive expressions, but really what we're seeing here is a deep passion for the sport, good or bad. So even if they're, even if they're expressing, even if their feelings are not necessarily of the more positive spin, they still appreciate the airspace to be able to provide their perspective, to share and to vent. I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, but we do have that lens on when we are taking our participants' feedback, and recognize when some things can be impacted or colored by a certain aspect. Moving on to another question, Daniel asks, have you ever done a study to try and recruit non-sports people to learn about and becoming a fan? Both my son and wife couldn't care less about sports. Wondering if you had any success with promotion to non-sports fans. Yes, in fact. So By the way, Rich Hollander, absolutely correct. That was Ginobili from the Spurs. 10 gold stars for you. But so to go back to Daniel's question, yes. So while we do focus, while I guess a larger body of our work does focus on established fans, we do try to get a good cross section of fans for certain types of studies and make sure that we are capturing a range of affinities. In fact, in one of the studies I referenced in our multi-phase fan journey for March Madness study, while we certainly focus on a piece on the more ardent fans who are going to stick through the tournament from beginning to end, we also carved out some time and method and space to make sure that we were talking to the casuals or the non-fans who are being pulled into that environment, by friends or loved ones, and understanding what their experience is as well. How can we engage them, and what are the points in that viewing, in that shared experience, where we might be able to activate them a little bit more. So yep, definitely a question that circles around as well. I think those are the only questions in the Q&A. Any other questions?
Well, I had one just piggybacking question off of Gregory, and you talked a lot about this, and you talked earlier on about other industries that you've worked in over the years. Do you find that enthusiasm among sports fans to ever be a barrier at getting to, I don't know, some of the more negative or critical opinions?
You would think, but I think in large part, that hasn't been as much of an issue. I haven't had any sports fans necessarily been shy about sharing what aspects of an experience they have a problem with, or even going off into tangents on disappointing road game streaks or things like that. It's definitely it's definitely something that we are aware of and try to contextualize as we sift through the feedback.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're over time and running into our next presentation. I see that Cliff has joined, so great job. Great. Thanks for leading us off. This was really insightful. Really appreciate it. Wish there was more time for us to wind down, but get out of here. We got to move on.
All right. Thank you, guys.